The cruelest people rarely expect kindness to be the one thing that changes their fate. Crimson wine arced through the air, like a splash of liquid sunset, catching the glow of 100 crystal chandeliers before soaking into the pale blue fabric of Emma Whitmore's simple dress. Laughter erupted across the grand hall, sharp and effortless, echoing beneath the towering stone arches of Mooncrest Palace, as if humiliation itself had become tonight's entertainment. Emma froze, her fingers tightening around the silver serving tray she had been carrying only seconds before. Tiny droplets slid from the hem of her skirt onto the polished marble floor, each one sounding louder in her ears than the orchestra playing at the far end of the ballroom. She lowered her eyes, swallowing the sting building in her throat, while whispers spread faster than wildfire through dry leaves. Someone chuckled that even the wine looked better on the floor than on a timid Omega. Another voice called her clumsy, despite everyone having witnessed exactly what happened. Emma didn't answer. She never did. 30 minutes earlier, the palace had looked almost magical beneath the rising full moon. Lanterns lined the winding pathways leading toward the royal banquet hall, filling the evening air with warm golden light that danced against white stone walls and blooming roses. Noble families arrived in polished carriages trimmed with silver and black, every guest dressed in embroidered silk, velvet, and jewels worthy of the kingdom's most celebrated gathering. Tonight marked the annual Moon Banquet, the one evening every influential alpha, beta, and respected omega hoped would reshape their future. Emma arrived through the servants' entrance, carrying folded table lemons instead of dreams. Her Aunt Margaret, the palace laundress, had reminded her twice to stay quiet, avoid eye contact, and never wander into conversations meant for nobles. Emma simply nodded. She had learned years ago that silence often protected her better than explanations. At 22, Emma possessed none of the dazzling confidence admired throughout the northern packs. Her long chestnut hair was tied into a neat braid. Her fair skin carried no expensive cosmetics, and her soft, gray-blue eyes rarely lifted above another person's shoulders. She moved carefully through crowded rooms, almost apologizing for taking up space, yet there was something gentle about her presence, something impossible to imitate. Earlier that evening, while arranging fresh flowers near the eastern courtyard, she had noticed a frightened wolf pup hiding beneath a marble bench after being startled by fireworks celebrating the banquet. Ignoring the elegant guests walking past, Emma knelt on the cool stone, whispering softly until the trembling little creature crawled into her waiting hands. She brushed leaves from its snowy fur before setting it safely beside the palace gardens, smiling only after watching it disappear beneath the hedges. No one thanked her. No one even noticed. Inside the ballroom, crystal glasses shimmered beneath candlelight while musicians filled the air with graceful melodies. Every conversation circled around one name: King Lucian Ashcroft. The Alpha King had not yet entered the hall, but his presence already lingered in every expectation, every nervous smile, every rehearsed greeting. Noble daughters adjusted jeweled necklaces, powerful alphas straightened embroidered jackets. Even seasoned council members lowered their voices whenever his name surfaced. Emma quietly carried another tray toward the center of the ballroom, hoping only to finish her duties unnoticed. She had no idea that before the night ended, every eye in the kingdom would know exactly who she was. Emma balanced the polished silver tray with steady hands, weaving quietly between clusters of elegantly dressed guests who barely acknowledged her existence except when they wanted another glass filled. She had long ago accepted that invisibility was easier than becoming the subject of unwanted attention. Every careful step she took reflected years of learning how to occupy as little space as possible. The towering ballroom glowed beneath hundreds of candles suspended from crystal chandeliers, their warm light reflecting across marble columns carved with wolves, moons, and ancient kings whose stone eyes seemed to watch every conversation unfolding below. Laughter drifted through the air, alongside the soft music of violins and harps, creating an atmosphere that appeared welcoming to outsiders, but felt carefully divided to those who understood the unspoken rules. Nobles gathered beneath embroidered banners, displaying the crests of powerful packs, discussing alliances, trade routes, and whispers about who might earn the Alpha King's favor before sunrise. Emma moved silently among them, lowering her eyes whenever someone glanced her way. Her Aunt Margaret had warned her countless times that confidence could easily be mistaken for arrogance when it came from someone of her station. Emma remembered every word. She refilled empty glasses without spilling a single drop, straightened folded napkins whenever she noticed they had shifted, and quietly thanked every servant who offered a passing smile. Kindness had become her language because it cost nothing, even when few people returned it. Near the western balcony, she noticed an elderly steward struggling to carry a heavy crate of fresh candles. Without hesitation, she placed her tray on a nearby serving table and hurried over, lifting one side before he could politely refuse. The grateful man offered a tired smile, telling her she had her mother's gentle heart. Emma blinked in surprise. Very few people still remembered her mother, and hearing those words warmed something inside her that she had almost forgotten. Before she could respond, another servant called for assistance, and the old steward disappeared into the crowd. Emma watched him leave with a quiet smile before returning to her duties. Across the ballroom, several young noblewomen observed the exchange with amused expressions. One of them, Vivian Blackwood, adjusted the emerald bracelet around her wrist before speaking loudly enough for her companions to hear. She remarked that some Omegas seemed born to carry everyone else's burdens. The women around her laughed politely, hiding their smiles behind jeweled fans. Emma pretended not to hear. She focused instead on arranging crystal glasses along a serving station near the center of the hall, counting each one to keep her thoughts calm. 1 glass, 2 glasses, 3 glasses. It was easier than listening to conversations that reminded her she did not belong. The enormous double doors at the far end of the ballroom remained closed, guarded by royal sentinels dressed in black and silver uniforms. Every few minutes, another guest glanced toward those doors before returning to nervous conversation. Anticipation continued to build like distant thunder before a summer storm. Stories about King Lucian Ashcroft filled every corner of the room. Some claimed he could recognize dishonesty with a single glance. Others insisted he remembered every face he had ever met. A visiting merchant even whispered that the Alpha King often judged character before hearing a single word. Emma paid little attention to the rumors. Kings belonged to a different world, one far beyond anything her quiet life had prepared her to understand. She reached for another bottle of crimson wine, completely unaware that several watchful eyes had already begun following her every movement, patiently waiting for the perfect opportunity to turn an ordinary servant into the evening's easiest target. Emma lifted the crystal bottle with practiced care, pouring deep crimson wine into a row of waiting glasses until each reflected the candlelight like liquid rubies. Around her, conversations grew louder as more distinguished families entered the ballroom, each arrival announced by heralds whose voices echoed against the vaulted ceiling. Every noble seemed eager to impress someone more powerful than themselves. Emma simply wished the evening would pass quietly. She reached for another polished glass when a familiar laugh drifted toward her from across the serving table. Vivian Blackwood approached with 3 elegantly dressed companions, their gowns shimmering beneath the chandeliers, their confident smiles carrying the effortless certainty of women who had never questioned whether they belonged. Vivian paused only a few feet away, slowly examining Emma from head to toe before offering a smile that never reached her eyes. "You have been working all evening," she said sweetly. "You must be exhausted." Emma returned a polite nod. "I am doing well, thank you." One of the other women tilted her head with exaggerated curiosity. "How remarkable! She even sounds grateful." Another covered her mouth as though trying to hide a laugh, but the amusement escaped anyway.
Emma lowered her gaze once again, hoping silence would end the conversation. Instead, it seemed to encourage it. Vivian picked up one of the filled glasses and slowly turned it between her fingers. "Tell me," she continued, "have you ever wondered what it feels like to attend this banquet as a guest instead of a servant?" Emma hesitated before answering honestly. "I have never thought about it." "Of course you have," another noblewoman replied. "Everyone dreams above their place once in a while." Their laughter blended with the surrounding music, quiet enough that nearby guests pretended not to notice, yet loud enough for Emma to hear every word. She forced herself to breathe slowly,
reminding herself that responding would only make matters worse. Just finish your work. Just keep walking. She gently reached for the tray, intending to continue serving another group across the ballroom. As she stepped forward, Vivian shifted ever so slightly into her path. The movement appeared accidental to anyone watching from a distance. Emma instinctively stopped before colliding with her. "Forgive me," Emma whispered. "I did not mean to interrupt." Vivian smiled again. "You are always apologizing." Before Emma could answer, another guest called Vivian's name from across the hall. Vivian turned as if preparing to leave, lifting her wine glass in one graceful motion. Then, with a movement so subtle it almost looked like carelessness, her wrist tilted. The crimson wine spilled across Emma's shoulder and cascaded over the front of her pale blue dress. Tiny drops splashed onto the polished marble floor, while the empty crystal glass remained safely in Vivian's hand. For one endless heartbeat, the ballroom seemed to fall strangely quiet around Emma. She stared at the spreading stain without moving, her heartbeat suddenly louder than the orchestra. Then came the laughter. It began with one soft chuckle before quickly spreading through the nearby circle of nobles. Someone remarked that even servants should learn how to stand properly. Another guest suggested darker colors would better suit someone who constantly made messes. Emma opened her mouth, then closed it again. She knew the truth. So did everyone standing nearby. Yet no one corrected the story already taking shape. She quietly reached for a folded linen cloth resting beside the serving station and knelt to wipe away the scattered drops before anyone could slip. Her hands trembled only slightly as she worked, refusing to let tears appear. Above her, the music continued as though nothing important had happened. But unseen beyond the carved balcony overlooking the grand hall, a pair of calm silver eyes had already witnessed everything from the very beginning. Emma kept her eyes lowered as the linen cloth slowly absorbed the crimson stain spreading across the polished marble. Every careful movement was deliberate, almost graceful, as though dignity could still be preserved by refusing to rush. Around her, conversations resumed one by one. The laughter faded into soft whispers, replaced by the familiar rhythm of crystal glasses clinking together and musicians continuing their elegant melody. The banquet moved forward exactly as it had before, leaving Emma to disappear back into the background. She quietly gathered the empty glasses from the serving table, careful not to leave even a single drop behind. The front of her pale blue dress remained stained, the dark red fabric impossible to hide beneath the ballroom lights. She knew the marks would not come out easily. Her Aunt Margaret would probably spend hours washing them later that night. The thought brought a faint ache to Emma's heart, not because of the ruined dress, but because someone else would carry the burden of another person's cruelty. She whispered a silent apology that no one could hear. High above the ballroom, beyond carved stone railings decorated with silver wolves, another pair of eyes remained fixed upon the scene below. King Lucian Ashcroft had entered the palace nearly 20 minutes earlier through a private passage reserved for the royal family. Instead of announcing his arrival immediately, he had paused on the upper gallery overlooking the great hall, allowing the banquet to unfold naturally beneath him. His advisors often encouraged this habit. People revealed their true character when they believed no crown was watching. Beside him stood Lord Cedric Hawthorne, the kingdom's senior counselor, reviewing the evening schedule in a quiet voice. Lucian barely seemed to hear him. His attention remained on the young Omega, carefully replacing crystal glasses, as though nothing unusual had happened. He had witnessed every moment from the instant the noblewomen approached her until the wine stained her dress. More importantly, he had noticed what followed. No accusations, no excuses, no desperate attempt to defend herself, only quiet composure. Lord Cedric finally realized the king's attention had drifted elsewhere. He followed Lucian's gaze toward the ballroom floor. "Should I summon the captain of the guard, Your Majesty?" he asked softly. Lucian remained silent for several long seconds. "Not yet," he answered at last. His calm voice carried neither anger nor approval. It was simply patient. Truth often reveals itself when people believe they have escaped consequence. Below them, Emma lifted another serving tray and continued walking through the guests despite the stain across her dress drawing occasional glances. Several servants offered sympathetic smiles as they passed, but none dared speak openly while surrounded by nobles. Emma appreciated every silent gesture nonetheless. Across the room, Vivian Blackwood accepted compliments from acquaintances who either had not seen what happened or chose to pretend they had not. She laughed easily, entirely convinced the embarrassing moment had already become another forgotten piece of banquet gossip. She did not once glance toward the upper gallery, where the Alpha King quietly observed the room with unwavering silver eyes. Outside the towering palace windows, the full moon climbed higher above the ancient forest, bathing the kingdom in pale light. Within moments, royal trumpets would announce the king's formal entrance into the grand hall. Hundreds of guests expected a ceremony filled with elegance, tradition, and celebration. None of them realized that before the evening ended, the Alpha King would remember far more than names and noble titles. He would remember choices. The anticipation inside the grand ballroom grew heavier with every passing minute. Servants made their final preparations, while noble guests adjusted jeweled collars, elegant gloves, and embroidered jackets, each determined to appear flawless before the Alpha King officially entered the hall. Emma quietly replaced a stack of polished silver utensils near the head table, hoping the growing excitement would draw attention away from the stains still visible across the front of her dress. She could feel curious glances following her whenever she crossed the room, yet she refused to hide. There was still work to do, and she intended to finish it with the same quiet care she had shown since arriving. As she arranged folded linen napkins beside the royal table, a familiar voice interrupted the calm. "You missed a spot." Emma looked up to find Vivian Blackwood standing only a few feet away with the same circle of companions gathered around her. Their expressions carried the confidence of people who expected the room to agree with whatever they found amusing. Emma lowered her eyes politely. "Thank you. I will check again." She carefully inspected the polished tabletop, even though it already reflected the chandeliers without a single mark. One of the women exchanged an exaggerated sigh with another. "She truly believes she belongs near the royal table," she whispered just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Soft laughter rippled through the group. Emma gently stepped back, preparing to leave without another word. Before she could turn away, Vivian reached toward a decorative arrangement resting at the center of the table and lightly adjusted one of the crystal candle holders. It tilted just enough for a folded linen napkin beneath it to slide onto the floor. Vivian immediately looked toward Emma with practiced disappointment. "Oh dear," she said, "you should be more careful." Imagine if that had happened after His Majesty arrived. Several nearby nobles glanced toward Emma, their expressions suggesting quiet judgment rather than curiosity. None of them had noticed how the napkin had actually fallen. Emma bent down without hesitation, retrieved the spotless linen, carefully folded it again, and returned it to its place. "I am sorry for the interruption," she said softly, even though she knew she had done nothing wrong. Her calm answer seemed almost disappointing to those hoping for embarrassment or protest. Vivian smiled faintly, but there was impatience behind her eyes now. She had expected frustration. Instead, she found only quiet grace. High above the ballroom, King Lucian continued observing every exchange without speaking. Lord Cedric noticed the subtle change in the king's expression. It was not anger, it was certainty. Lucian had seen enough to recognize a pattern. One act might be dismissed as misunderstanding. Two became intention. Three revealed character. The royal trumpeters moved into position beside the towering entrance doors, lifting polished silver instruments toward the vaulted ceiling. The musicians allowed the final note of their melody to fade into silence. Conversations throughout the ballroom stopped almost instantly as every guest turned toward the entrance with eager anticipation. Emma stepped away from the royal table and joined the line of servants standing respectfully along the marble walls, keeping her hands folded neatly before her. She took one slow breath, hoping only to remain unnoticed for the rest of the evening. Across the room, Vivian straightened her emerald bracelet and lifted her chin with confident elegance, completely unaware that while she prepared to impress the Alpha King, he had already formed his first impression of her long before she ever had the chance to bow. The first note of the royal trumpets rolled across the ballroom like distant thunder, rich and commanding, silencing every whisper before the second note even sounded. Hundreds of conversations disappeared at once. Crystal glasses settled onto polished tables. Noble families turned toward the towering entrance doors with practiced elegance, every guest lowering their head as ancient traditions demanded. Emma quietly joined the line of palace servants, standing along the marble wall, folding her hands before her and keeping her eyes lowered. She could still feel the cool fabric of her stained dress against her skin, but she pushed the discomfort aside. Tonight was not about her. It never had been. The enormous doors slowly opened, revealing a corridor bathed in silver moonlight. Royal guards entered first in perfect formation, their polished armor reflecting the glow of towering chandeliers. Behind them walked Lord Cedric Hawthorne, followed by members of the Royal Council. Finally, King Lucian Ashcroft crossed the threshold with calm, measured steps that echoed through the silent hall. He wore a tailored black ceremonial coat, embroidered with silver threads that caught the light with every movement. A dark cape rested across his shoulders, fastened by a crescent moon class carved from white gold. His silver eyes remained calm, observing every face without appearing hurried. There was no need for dramatic gestures. His presence alone commanded complete attention. Every noble bowed deeply. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. Emma respectfully inclined her head with everyone else, never expecting the Alpha King's gaze to pass over someone like her. Lucian walked slowly through the center aisle, acknowledging formal greetings with little more than a courteous nod. Powerful alphas introduced themselves with polished confidence. Distinguished families proudly presented their heirs. Smiles filled the room, each one carefully rehearsed for this single moment. Yet Lucian noticed far more than polished manners. He recognized strained laughter, forced compliments, restless eyes, and subtle attempts to gain favor. Most importantly, he remembered the quiet Omega standing against the marble wall, whose stained dress remained the only visible imperfection in the magnificent ballroom. As he approached the royal table, his pace slowed almost imperceptibly. His eyes briefly rested on Emma before continuing forward. The moment lasted only a heartbeat, but Emma felt something impossible to explain, as though the room itself had grown still. She immediately lowered her gaze even further, assuming she had imagined it. Lucian reached the head of the ballroom and turned toward the assembled guests. Lord Cedric announced the traditional welcome while servants began presenting the first course with graceful precision. Emma lifted another serving tray and joined the procession, determined to perform her duties flawlessly despite everything that had happened earlier. Across the room, Vivian Blackwood watched the Alpha King with quiet satisfaction, convinced she had made a memorable impression simply by standing among the kingdom's most distinguished families. She never considered that his attention had already settled elsewhere long before the ceremony began. As Emma carefully approached the royal table, carrying crystal goblets filled with fresh spring water, One of the glasses shifted slightly on the polished tray. She steadied it with practiced hands before a single drop could spill, unaware that Lucian had noticed the instinctive care with which she protected even the smallest responsibility. He said nothing. Instead, he quietly accepted the glass she offered with a respectful nod that no one else seemed to notice. For Emma, it was only another task completed. For the Alpha King, it confirmed what the evening had already begun to reveal. Grace was easiest to recognize in those who believed no one was watching. The banquet continued with flawless ceremony, yet beneath the polished elegance, an invisible tension quietly settled over the grand hall. Servants moved gracefully between tables, musicians filled the air with gentle melodies, and honored guests exchanged polished smiles. But King Lucian Ashcroft spoke little. Instead, he observed. Every greeting, every conversation, every glance carried meaning to a ruler who had learned that truth often revealed itself between carefully chosen words. Emma continued serving with the same quiet dedication she had shown since sunset. She refilled glasses before anyone asked, collected empty plates without interrupting conversations, and thanked every servant who passed her with a gentle smile. Although the stain across her dress remained impossible to hide, she refused to let embarrassment define the rest of her evening. She reminded herself that kindness was a choice no one else could take away. Across the ballroom, Vivian Blackwood noticed the Alpha King's calm attention drifting toward the servants more than once. Mistaking curiosity for opportunity, she approached the royal table with effortless confidence after receiving permission from the Master of Ceremonies. Her companions followed a respectful distance behind, each wearing the composed smile expected of noble families. Vivienne offered a graceful bow. "Your Majesty, it is an honor to welcome you to Mooncrest Palace. We hope tonight reflects the strength and refinement of our kingdom." Lucian acknowledged her greeting with a courteous nod. "Your hospitality is appreciated." His answer was calm, polite, and impossible to interpret. Hoping to extend the conversation, Vivian glanced toward Emma, who happened to be replacing a serving pitcher nearby. "Our palace servants try their best," she said with a soft laugh, "although some require a great deal more guidance than others." A few nearby nobles smiled politely, expecting the king to share the harmless amusement. Instead, silence settled over the table. Lucian looked neither amused nor offended. He simply turned his silver eyes toward Emma for a brief moment before returning his attention to Vivienne. "Competence is revealed by consistency," he said evenly. "Character is revealed by how we treat those who owe us nothing." The words were delivered without accusation, yet the conversation around the royal table faded almost instantly. Vivienne's smile remained in place, but uncertainty flickered behind her eyes for the first time that evening. She lowered her head with another elegant bow, quietly excused herself, and returned to her companions. None of them spoke until they had crossed the ballroom. Emma had heard only fragments of the exchange while arranging fresh water glasses. She assumed the king had been discussing matters of leadership rather than anything connected to her. She resumed her work exactly as before, unaware that several guests had begun watching her with new curiosity instead of quiet dismissal. Lord Cedric leaned slightly toward the Alpha King and spoke in a voice too low for others to hear. "You have made them think." Lucian's eyes remained on the gathering before him. "Thinking is the first step," he replied softly. "Understanding comes after people are willing to see." At that very moment, an elderly palace steward carrying an ornate ceremonial tray lost his footing near the center of the ballroom. Before anyone else could react, Emma stepped forward with calm instinct, reaching out just in time to steady the tray before a single crystal goblet touched the floor. The old steward looked at her with grateful eyes. Across the hall, King Lucian watched the quiet act of kindness unfold, and this time he did not look away. The old steward steadied himself with a grateful smile, his weathered hands still resting on the ornate ceremonial tray that Emma had prevented from slipping. "Thank you, my dear," he whispered, relief softening the lines across his face. Emma answered with the same gentle smile she offered everyone. I am glad I was close enough to help." Without waiting for praise, she carefully adjusted the crystal goblets until every piece rested securely before quietly stepping back into line with the other servants. To Emma, it had been nothing more than another opportunity to make someone's evening a little easier. To those who had witnessed it, the simple act carried a quiet dignity that no expensive title could imitate. King Lucian watched the exchange without interrupting the ceremony. Around him, members of the royal council continued discussing harvest reports, border agreements, and trade proposals. Yet his attention remained fixed on the young Omega, whose kindness seemed entirely instinctive. She had not looked around to see who was watching. She had not expected recognition. She had simply acted because someone needed help. That difference mattered more than any carefully prepared speech delivered throughout the evening. Lucian slowly rose from his chair. The movement was neither hurried nor dramatic, but it immediately drew the attention of every guest in the ballroom. Conversations faded into silence once again as hundreds of curious eyes followed the Alpha King. Instead of addressing the council or greeting another noble family, he stepped away from the royal table and walked calmly across the marble floor. His polished shoes echoed softly beneath the vaulted ceiling, each measured step increasing the quiet anticipation spreading through the hall. Emma remained unaware that he was approaching until a respectful palace attendant gently whispered, "Miss Whitmore." She turned in surprise and instinctively lowered her head as she realized the Alpha King now stood only a few feet away. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from disbelief. She searched her memory, wondering whether she had made some unnoticed mistake during the banquet. Lucian studied the crimson stain that still marked the front of her pale blue dress before meeting her uncertain eyes. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was calm, steady, and carried effortlessly through the silent ballroom. Emma swallowed gently before answering. "Emma Whitmer, Your Majesty." Lucian gave a slight nod. "Emma, I noticed your work this evening." She blinked in surprise, unsure how to respond. Before she could speak, the elderly steward stepped forward with quiet courage. "Your Majesty, if I may," he said respectfully. "She has been helping everyone since she arrived. She even rescued the frightened wolf pup in the courtyard before the guests entered. She never asked for recognition." Several nearby servants nodded almost imperceptibly, silently confirming every word. Lucian looked from the steward back to Emma. "Is that true?" Emma hesitated, clearly uncomfortable becoming the center of attention. "I only did what anyone should do," she answered softly. A faint smile appeared at the corner of the Alpha King's lips, the first genuine expression many guests had seen from him all evening. "Not everyone does," he replied. The simple sentence settled over the ballroom with unexpected weight. Guests who had ignored Emma earlier now found themselves looking at her differently. Even those who had dismissed her as invisible could no longer pretend she had escaped the notice of the one person whose judgment mattered most. Across the hall, Vivian Blackwood stood perfectly still, her confident smile slowly fading as she realized the evening was no longer unfolding according to the story she had imagined. The ballroom remained perfectly silent, as though even the music had forgotten how to breathe. Emma stood motionless beneath the glow of the crystal chandeliers, still trying to understand why the Alpha King had chosen to speak to someone as ordinary as her. Around the hall, nobles exchanged uncertain glances, sensing that the evening had quietly shifted in a direction none of them had expected. King Lucian let the silence linger for another moment before calmly turning toward the assembled guests. His silver eyes swept across the grand hall, pausing only briefly as they settled upon the familiar faces that had witnessed everything from beginning to end. "A kingdom is not measured by the beauty of its palaces," he said, his voice carrying with effortless clarity through every corner of the ballroom. "It is measured by the character its people choose when they believe no one important is watching." No one moved. No one interrupted. The words settled gently over the gathering, inviting reflection rather than fear. Lucian continued, "This evening I observed strength without pride, patience without complaint, and kindness offered without expectation of reward. Those qualities deserve greater honor than wealth, titles, or polished introductions." Emma slowly lifted her eyes, surprised to realize he was speaking about her. She instinctively shook her head ever so slightly, almost embarrassed by the attention. She had never served others in hopes of recognition. She had simply believed that every person deserved compassion, whether anyone noticed or not. Lucian reached to his shoulders and unclasped the ceremonial cape that marked his royal office for the evening. The rich black fabric, embroidered with silver thread, shimmered softly beneath the candlelight as he carefully placed it across Emma's shoulders, covering the crimson stain that had remained visible throughout the banquet. The gesture was simple, respectful, and filled with unmistakable meaning. A quiet gasp moved through the ballroom before fading into complete silence once more. Emma looked down at the cape resting around her shoulders, her eyes glistening with emotion she struggled to contain. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "I do not know how to thank you." Lucian offered the faint, reassuring smile that only a few people in the kingdom had ever seen. "You already have," he replied. "You reminded this hall that kindness does not require permission." Near the back of the ballroom, the elderly steward gently lowered his head, smiling with quiet satisfaction. Several servants exchanged warm glances, standing a little taller than they had earlier that evening. Even guests who had remained silent during Emma's humiliation now seemed unable to meet her eyes without a trace of regret. Vivian Blackwood stood among her companions, her confident posture slowly giving way to thoughtful silence. For the first time that evening, appearances no longer mattered. Character did. Outside the palace, the full moon shone above the ancient forest, casting silver light across the stone towers of Mooncrest Palace. Inside, Emma no longer felt invisible. She had arrived, believing her greatest hope was simply to finish another evening unnoticed. Instead, she walked beside the Alpha King as he escorted her toward the palace gardens, not as someone suddenly transformed by royalty, but as the same gentle woman she had always been. The difference was that someone had finally chosen to see her clearly. As the great doors opened to the moonlit courtyard, a cool breeze carried the scent of pine and blooming roses through the night. Emma looked toward the glowing horizon, unaware that this banquet would one day be remembered not because of ancient traditions or noble celebrations, but because it marked the first quiet step in a destiny that neither she nor the Alpha King had yet begun to understand.